Back with Warren Kinsella. Warren, let's get right to the photo that's upsetting you, that precipitated a column in Post Media. Melanie Joly and who?
Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is the head of the Palestinian Authority. And, I should say, to be fair to him, he's not Hamas. He's the guy that Hamas kind of shouldered out of the way. However, he is kind of a bad guy. He denies the Holocaust. He has likened Jews many times to Nazis. He's praised Hitler, but most seriously, in terms of his conduct, not just his words, he's a crook. He has pilfered millions that were supposed to go to the Palestinian people to help them survive and to build a society. Millions, he and his two sons. And there was Melanie Joly at the end of this week showing up in a tour, clutching his hand like, she was on a school trip and beaming. And it's problematic, but I think it's also symbolic. This is a government that has reinstated, actually, they never really stopped funding UNRWA, who UNRWA itself has admitted they've got employees who participated in the barbarism of October 7th. This is a government that has indicated it's going to stop the trade in non-lethal military supply to Israel. And they're even doing stuff, Charles, like stopping the production of kosher meats, which are part of the Jewish dietary restrictions. And, you and I have covered politics and foreign affairs for a long time. There has always been a problem at foreign affairs that predates Melanie Joly back through successive ministers, but it really seems to be getting worse right now. And, right now is the worst possible time for this to be happening.
Yeah, Israel versus Arab countries, Canadian foreign affairs has been perceived by many, many people as on the side of Arabs in general. Just to clear up a couple of things here, Melanie Joly is Canada's foreign affairs minister. I guess they call it global affairs now.
Global affairs,
Anyway,
yeah.
she's the minister, so she represents Canada around the world. That's Melanie Joly, and UNRWA is the United Nations relief agency in the Palestinian territories, and they have been accused with evidence of having several, not just a handful, but several people on the payroll of Hamas, and some of them are accused of having participated in the October 7th massacre. Is there any other dot that I need to dot and T that I need to cross to make the case?
No, and you've done an exceptional job of it right there. It's hard for people to follow this stuff. I think a lot of people have tuned it out, which has not been helpful to the Jewish community. The Jewish community is people I know are saying, please, Canada, please, neighbors and friends, pay attention to what's happening to us. Protests at synagogues where people are holding up signs accusing them of sin, S-I-N, of being synagogues, places of sin, Jews being attacked. The problem is getting worse. And, I think when you have a department like Foreign Affairs or Global Affairs, which is one of our most important government departments federally, it's the outward face of Canada. It really is important, I think, that department be seen as fair and balanced. And as you and I have both done, you and I have been very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he's a crook as well. I think he'll be gone after the war, hopefully sooner than that. But, I support Israel and I support the Jewish people, and they're dealing with this wave of anti-Semitism around the world. It's possible for global affairs to be more balanced than they are. It's desirable that they be more balanced. And under Melanie Joly, I think the balance has been disturbed. It's been wrecked. And I really think she's the wrong minister at this very difficult time.
Let's get to, before we get to the issue of Netanyahu and condemnations coming from Joe Biden and coming from now Chuck Schumer, majority leader in the Senate. And let's just stipulate to be as fair-minded Canadians that we are, that you can be both opposed to Netanyahu, but also opposed to Hamas. It's not difficult to hold
Correct.
two thoughts if you're a fair-minded person. And I'm not likening Netanyahu to Hamas. I'm simply saying that for those people who say, well, if you're against Hamas, you have to support Netanyahu. That's intellectually both slippery and dishonest, and that's not what we're about here. But before we do all of that, as far as the situation uh, attacking Jews in Canada, the biggest Jewish community in Canada, of course, is in Toronto, where you spend much of your time. The one of the big guardrails that keeps democracy going is institutions, and I'm talking about all institutions, not just governmental institutions, but one of the institutions that's absolutely key, so that we don't slip into chaos and make democracy debased, would be the Toronto Police Service. In this case, I have been perceived as pro cop all my life. I don't want to get into all the reasons. I can put it in 30 seconds or less. I've had my life threatened, and it wasn't the thug that saved my life. It was the cop. So on a very personal level, I've been a pro cop person. I think Warren Kinsella, for several reasons, not different from my own, you have been as well. So one can also hold two thoughts at the same time. One can be pro Canadian police, whether it's RCMP or local, but also critical of what the Toronto Police Service is doing and not doing. I wonder if you could fill in the blanks there, Warren, on what the Toronto Police Service right now is not doing regarding attacks on the Jewish community in Toronto.
Well, how much time do you have? Right? Like
This
how
is
long?
this is important. So take whatever time, because the Toronto Police Service is the largest in the country, and this matters.
No, I know I'm being facetious. My point is the list is long. The answer to your question is, the list is long. There's a firebombing of a Jewish delicatessen, a Russian Jewish delicatessen up near Steeles in Toronto. No arrests. There have been attacks on Jewish community centers. No arrests. There have been attacks on physical violence on Jews. No arrests. There have been the targeting of the synagogues. We just referred to two synagogues in Toronto just in the past week or so. No arrests. No arrests of the people who were doing the attacks, by the way. There's just been a huge, huge problem in Toronto and in Montreal. And, I don't know where the police are. Like, they're in Ontario. They're on what's called the Sunshine List. The vast majority of Toronto police earn more than $100,000 a year. Some of them earn substantially more than that. Where are they? Where are they? And it's not like we have a shortage of laws, Charles. We've got a multiplicity of laws under Section 319, 320 of the Criminal Code. The Trudeau government is proposing to bring in even more laws to deal with this sort of problem online. We got unlawful assembly and rioting and intimidation and threats and promotion of hate and promotion of genocide. We've got the laws. What we seem to lack is the guts, the wherewithal. We seem to lack police forces in two of our largest cities to act against it. And I think those two cities police forces are deserving of particular criticism, because in other places, the police forces are doing okay. In Ottawa, they broke up a plot to carry out a terrorist attack in Ottawa, in Vancouver, and Calgary, and Edmonton. They're doing comparatively okay compared to Montreal and Toronto. Winnipeg, I think, is relatively okay. There was a Jewish home that was shot up just before Christmas. Didn't get as much attention as it deserved. I don't think the bad guys have been caught in that case. But in the case of Edmonton, the guy who broke into city council chambers, firing off a gun and uttering threats, they caught him right away and he's being prosecuted. So it depends, where you are in this country. Some police forces are doing a much better job than others. And basically in Toronto and Montreal, the job they're doing sucks.
So when the job that a police service is doing, we're not talking about any individual officer here. We're talking about the institution. When a police service, whether it's Montreal or Toronto, is, to use your word, sucking, who reads the riot act to police? How does this country work, or how is it supposed to work?
Well, politicians are not supposed to give direction to the police. I mean, that's how Justin Trudeau and his government got in trouble with the in the Jody Wilson-Raybould case because they were trying to get her to order the prosecutors to do something about a Liberal Party donor, and she refused to do that. And she was right to refuse to do that. So you'd think, people would learn a lesson from that. I think they have, but now they've gone to the opposite extreme from getting, too far into giving direction to the police and prosecutors. Now they're giving no direction at all. Like in the city of Montreal, where I was just before the holidays, I met with people there who have been working with the police and working on the problem that is a big problem in Montreal. And the police there are blaming the politicians. They're saying, well, we've got this left-wing mayor in the form of Valerie Plante, and we don't think she's backing us up. She got elected by a lot of the people who are doing the protests. So to hell with it. We're not going to do anything. And in Toronto, you hear the same sort of thing. I think it's bullshit. Like at the end of the day, the police have the power. And as I indicated a minute ago, have got the laws to deal with the problem. They need to deal with the problem. I don't think Olivia Chow or Valerie Plante are going to say, I disagree with the police. I think they're going to let the police do their job. So the police should do their job.
So let me go to the Constitution, and you're the lawyer, so I always defer to you. So, according to our Constitution, all of the cities, all of the towns, all of the hamlets and villages of this country are all creatures of the province. The province is the boss. So, wouldn't it be fair to say that in this case, if the Montreal and Toronto police services suck, and somebody on high needs to say something without interfering directly in their business, but somebody needs to speak out? Wouldn't it be, in the case of Ontario, the Premier of Ontario, and the same in Quebec? So here's my question to you, Warren Kinsella, the lawyer and the constitutional expert. Why aren't the premiers of Canada's provinces reading the Riot Act to police?
Well, in the case of Premier Legault in Quebec, to give him some credit, which is something I don't do very often, and I don't think you do either, after an imam stood in front of 20,000 people and called upon God or Allah to kill the Jews, Legault was livid and said that the police needed to act. So he deserves some credit for that. Ford has made similar comments condemning, acts of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic crime in the streets. But I think the most important person really in both of those situations is not the premiers, it's the Attorney General. Let me explain why. If somebody robs the bank of Charles Adler, they get caught and there's evidence, they get prosecuted. You don't have to ask anybody's permission. Prosecutors can decide whether if the evidence is sufficient to prosecute. But the sections about promoting hate are one of the few sections in the criminal code that require the permission of the Attorney General of the province for the prosecution to go ahead. And the problem with that is, for example, the section 319, the promotion of hatred section has been in place since about 1969. It came out of something called the Cohen Commission that looked into hate crimes and said, here's how we can deal with it. Since 1969, Charles, that section has been used maybe 2 or 3 dozen times, tops. Keegstra was one, and some Nazis I went after in Toronto was another, but it hasn't been used very often. And, the obvious question I think you're thinking of right now is, well, if those are the only prosecutions that are taking place, I compare it to the fact that we've had thousands of hate crimes, obvious hate crimes taking place in the country. Why isn't this resulting in this? Why are the hate crimes resulting in prosecutions? It's because of the attorney generals. They are very reluctant to give permission to prosecute in these cases. I don't know why. My suggestion has been, and I've written about this, we need to remove the requirement that the police and prosecutors have to seek the permission of the attorney general. Too much politics gets involved. Just prosecute it like you would any other section of the criminal code, and then the judge and the jury can decide what the outcome should be, not the attorney general.
So I want you to help members of the public here, because there is this notion that if people demonstrate, whether it's demonstrating in front of a synagogue or a, a Jewish bookstore, whatever, that there's nothing wrong with that. So, separate it for me, would you, Warren? What is the distinction between simply exercising freedom of expression, which is sacred in a free country like Canada, exercising freedom of expression, and committing a hate crime or involving yourself in criminal harassment? There are many other laws, but what's the difference between illegal and legal when it comes to these demonstrations?
Well, in my view, what it should be is, for example, the Israeli consulate in the city of Toronto is at the corner of Bloor and Yonge Street. It's in a prominent location. It's got a big sidewalk there. That is a proper place to protest Israeli government policy. That is a proper place to protest against the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu. You're allowed to do that. In fact, I think people who live in that area and work in that area expect that. What is not proper and what is hateful is to target a place of worship, like a synagogue, at which is a place where people are at their most vulnerable, as we saw during the Quebec City mosque shooting a few years ago. You don't go after a place of worship. You don't go after someone's home, as somebody did in Winnipeg. You don't go after a community center. Like, it's okay to oppose policies of governments. It's okay to do that. That's encouraged, to your question, under our Constitution. Section 2B, you are permitted to do that. You are not, or should not, be permitted to go after people who are individuals exercising their faith or just going about their lives peacefully. And that's what's happening. And that's why some of us are so critical of the police and are kind of starting to move towards becoming anti-police, because the police are not protecting innocent civilians.
So let's talk about innocent civilians in Gaza. Um, Everyone understands that Israel has the right to exist. I think everyone understands. I mean, radicals don't understand that, but most people understand. Once again, the fair-minded Canadian is who we're appealing to here. Fair-minded American, anyone else who's fair-minded, listening or watching the podcast. So, yes, Israel has the right to exist. Yes, Israel has the right to defend itself. But, does Israel have the right to kill tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza, most of whom are not Hamas, in order to achieve their objectives of preserving and protecting the Jewish state? Once again, I'm asking you not to be a partisan pro this or pro that, simply to exercise your deductive reasoning, your logic, and your training in law and international law. Is there not something wrong with this picture?
Yeah, there is. International law accepts that, unfortunately, regrettably, in any war, in every war, civilians get killed. Where you get into trouble is where an inordinately large number of civilians are getting killed. And I think in the early stages of this war, we don't know this for sure, but this has been reported by some credible news organizations. And the Israeli military, who quite frankly dropped the ball on October 7th, right? They didn't even see it coming. They didn't protect Israelis, were using ordnance. They were using bombs, in effect, dumb bombs that had the effect of hurting and killing too many innocent civilians. Apparently that approach has changed, so that's a good thing. But I think, getting back to your original point, Israeli military policy is ultimately dictated by the civilians within the Israeli government. And the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is the most furthest right government in the history, I think, of Israel. And they are just like the wrong government to have in place at this time. So something very interesting happened a few days ago. Not many people in the media paid attention to it. I thought they should. Benny Gantz, who is the opposition leader to Benjamin Netanyahu, and has been brought into a coalition government during the war, but is a former general in the Israeli armed forces. He traveled to Europe and the United States to meet with very senior people in government. Netanyahu lost his mind. said, how dare you? There's only one person representing Israel, and so on. And I think what Gantz was doing by traveling and meeting with senior people, and what those senior people in the United States, for example, were saying was, we're looking past Netanyahu. We want to change. This week, Biden, his frustration with Netanyahu burst out into the open, and he was much more critical, or they allowed a leak to get out where he was much more critical. Chuck Schumer, who is the most senior, actually, he's one of the most powerful Jews on the planet, came out and was highly critical of Netanyahu's government. And Blinken did the same thing, I think, just last night. So, the three most powerful people on the planet who Netanyahu should really, really be paying attention to what those guys are saying, they're now publicly saying what they've been saying privately, which is that Netanyahu needs to go, and that the war, they need to, wrap this up as quickly as possible.
Blinken is Secretary of State in the Joe Biden administration. So something else that needs to be said here, just to keep the large perspective. Why is it important for the United States? I'm not just talking about Joe Biden's campaign against Donald Trump, much bigger picture here. Why is it important for the United States to stop Netanyahu's conduct of this war in Gaza?
Because Israel needs the support of moderate democratic governments around the world. Israel cannot go it alone, and they particularly cannot go it without the support militarily and financially and diplomatically of the United States of America. They can't. And, Golda Meir, there's a wonderful movie that just came out. I encourage everybody to see, about Golda, who went through a similar crisis during the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. And, they've got scenes where she's being visited by Henry Kissinger, and Henry's saying to her, Golda, you got to cool it. And she's saying, back off. I'm going to do my thing. That was Golda Meir. She's just much more capable leader than Netanyahu ever will be. They have to listen to the Americans. They don't give a shit what Canada has to say, or, Sweden, both of whom announced to reinstate the funding to UNRWA. They got to care about the United States. I think Netanyahu, I think the writing's on the wall. Benny Gantz is meeting with foreign leaders. You've got the United States openly saying he's got to go. I just do not see Netanyahu surviving. And that's leaving aside the fact that he's facing 3 corruption proceedings that he's been trying madly to stop for a number of years now. And they're serious corruption prosecutions. So I think he's a goner.
And we should mention that regardless of what people may think of Israel's foreign policy currently in Gaza, as far as justice is concerned, the Israelis are not timid about prosecuting prime ministers, former prime ministers. A former prime minister did do prison time in Israel. So it's a country that takes that seriously, and it's also taken seriously by Netanyahu, that the moment he's no longer in power, there's a very good chance that he'll be in leg irons, handcuffs, and in prison. So this to him is about his personal freedom as well. So Warren, help me with this. In light of everything that we're talking about, Israel cannot become a world pariah. Israel needs the United States. The United States wants Netanyahu to move on or move out, or both. Why is it that he still has a large degree of popularity inside Israel? Do the Israeli people not see the threat to Israel's future in having Netanyahu as boss?
He doesn't anymore. Honest to God, he doesn't. I've looked at the polling. My firm, the Daisy Group, we do lots of polling. We write questionnaires for people. The polling since October 7th has shown the vast majority of Israelis, I'm talking 80+%, want him gone. Even before October 7th, Charles, the biggest protests in Israeli history were against Netanyahu and the so-called judicial reforms that he was trying to jam through. They're completely unconstitutional and giving him an extraordinary amount of power. The Israelis were rising up against him already. And the hostage families who, I've met with some of these people, it just breaks your heart, the pain that they experience. They're protesting in front of Netanyahu's house every single night. He's lost basically every constituency except for some of these isolationist, protectionist, far-right religious parties, it's not enough to sustain him anymore. I really believe that he is a goner. So any support that he would have had when he formed a government, that is now, it's gone. October 7th changed everything.
Just a few minutes left. I want to bring it home to Canada, Warren Kinsella. Pierre Poilievre in British Columbia recently said that he didn't care what corporations had to say about many, many things, that he wasn't paying attention to corporations. He was paying attention to the working class. What does that say to you about Poilievre's campaign? And how does Warren Kinsella judge the idea of the Conservatives posing as NDPers?
Well, the proof's in the pudding. Full disclosure, I've been proud to represent LIUNA, biggest trade union in North America, the Laborers International Union in North America. I've represented them for years. And LIUNA, along with about 15 other trade unions, ended up endorsing the Doug Ford government in the last two elections in Ontario. And why did they do that? It's because Ford has had some very progressive labor policies, kind of stuff you'd actually see from an NDP government in the past. I think what Poilievre is trying to do is kind of do a carbon copy of what Ford has done. The problem he's got is I'm not clear on whether, a lot of unions believe him. I actually, and I do lobby work. I liked it when Poilievre said corporate lobbyists aren't going to like me because I'm not going to pay attention to them. I'm going to pay attention to regular people. Politicians say stuff like that all the time, but that would be nice if that actually were to happen. So I guess the jury's out.
I'm sorry. I'm just too old, Warren. I've just been around for too long. The idea that, and this is not about Conservatives, whether it's,
they're all the same.
If a liberal said they wouldn't pay attention to corporate lobbyists, lobbyists run this country, and this isn't some conspiracy theory of mine. All governments, yes, NDP governments as well, provincially, pay attention to lobbyists. You know all about the lobby business. At times you're a lobbyist yourself. The idea that governments will ignore lobbyists is a crock. I mean, it's probably the biggest crock I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, like I say, it was nice. It's a nice thought. But we'll see. I mean, one of his advisors is the top lobbyist for Huawei, and he said he wouldn't listen to Huawei either. So, you're absolutely right. They all say the same thing. Liberals, Tories, New Democrats, they're not going to listen to lobbyists, and then they end up doing so. But on the union piece, if he's serious and he does what Ford did, because nobody believed Ford would actually pull it off, and he did, I think that would be a good thing. And, I'm biased. I represent this big trade union, and I'm proud to do so. But I think they would pretty good thing. It would be for politicians to listen a bit more to some of the union folks and not just some lobbyists.
And in full transparency, you're not unfriendly with Doug Ford, and you and Doug Ford have had a
he's
pretty
a friend.
Good relationship over the years. Yeah. All right.
He's a friend. We used to be arch enemies.
Yeah.
And he called me at some very difficult points in my life. And, you know how it is. You remember stuff like that. He didn't call me about policy. He didn't have to. I'd been kicking the shit out of him in the media, and I was down, and he gave me a call, and he was a human being. And so I guess that's the big question here is Poilievre a human being? Is he going to be kind to humans? So far, the evidence is not good. The evidence is not good in that regard. Sometimes they can surprise you, but so far it's just words.
Folks, you will not get this on any other podcast where a significant guest says, we don't know whether or not a person who is perceived as possibly a prime minister in waiting, we really don't know whether he's going to be kind to human beings. All right. So on that happy note, Warren Kinsella, thank you so much.
Thank you, fellow human.
I'm